The real vampires could not deliver a damn about fictional stereotypes. For a completely long term, vampires have been as commonplace in Greece as in Romania. And even though they scared Greeks out of their minds, they were quite capable to stroll about in full Greek daylight. As any Greek should tell you. The only time vampires had been forced to remain of their coffins become between the hours of Vespers on Saturday and the cease of the liturgy on the Sunday morning. Typically, what matters in actual vampire USA isn't always a physical environment, however a sacred one. For similar reasons, a key reason of vampirism in Greece changed into excommunication, as for food. One Greek interviewed in the 20th century said, "No, I by no means heard of a vampire ingesting blood. They might eat your liver or other organs. They may feed on themselves in their graves, or on nearby corpses." In Germany, worshippers at Sunday Carrier had been alleged to have heard them smacking their lips as they munched away under. These ideals ought to have had diverse origins. 1. Grimly become the people by accident buried alive could gnaw on their very own hands while starving. The sounds of lip smacking in joy were probably corpse gases erupting, reminding us, as Paul Barber showed at Duration, that the lifeless are chemically very much alive for some time. Perhaps most of all, they replicate a primary notion that the vampire genuinely wishes to feed on something, and isn't always fussy. In truth, much like the zombie, he isn't always going to invite for a menu or a sommelier before sinking his undead enamel into your veins, flesh or liver. Vampires in Greece and someplace else may assault farm animals. At the same time as Montague Summers tells of a vampire from the island of Naxos which robbed eggs and hen. Greek vampires have been regarded to drink the milk of goats, or to be absolutely vegan. One became found to be storing a nutritious picnic of grapes, apples and nuts in his coffin, and on some other occasion 6 vampires had been seen in a area grazing on inexperienced beans. Modern vampire fanatics could likely now not apprehend a real vampire. The actual vampires appeared like normal shabby useless peasants. Far from being stylishly gaunt and chiseled, they have been regularly downright fat. Summers tells of one British revenant from Alnwick being of frightful corpulence, even as Greek vampires may be browned like a complete sack, with skin stretched like the parchment of a drum. This was again because of corpse gases, though what mattered most to terrified onlookers became the impact that the frame turned into failing to decompose. Far from faded, such corpses might be darkish blue or black, again because of the chemistry of dying. In nations wherein vampires did drink blood, a corpse with reddened skin was specially horrifying, as this certainly indicated that it turned into feeding on the dwelling, just to make its look still greater perplexing, for those who truly feared them. Vampires could take nearly any form in any respect. Bats are not unusual, however we hear of sinister puppies, cats, hares, pigs, weasels, birds and reptiles. Let a vampire burning any insects or birds or snakes dashing out of the flaming pyre would be pressure day returned, lest this turned into the vampire seeking to break out in any other shape. In Romania simply around a century ago, explains Agnes Murgocci, your low-tech vampire staking for the squeamish absolutely concerned pinning a moth to the wall, simply to be at the secure side. There were 2 sorts of good judgment beneath this bewildering array of shapes. One was that the devil turned into in particular a deceiver, a grasp of hide, taking myriad bodies since that deadly serpent first shimmied up to Adam and Eve. The other changed into that, while you clearly believed in vampires, you didn't need constantly want anything notable to convince you. It changed into now not a lot a case of seeing as believing as seeing. The vampire involves tuck you into bed. Every nighttime whilst you doze off, you're quickly paralyzed to prevent you appearing out your desires. Usually, you realize nothing approximately this, but those who wake into a sort of in-between nation can find themselves terrified at being each immobile and speechless. That is sleep paralysis. Next, enter the nightmare. As you lie there helpless, something is coming slowly from the corner of your room towards you. It can take numerous shapes, however it is terrifying beyond all description. It gets on the bed, onto your chest. A feeling of high-quality weight and suffocation may additionally now weigh down you. Once in a while, combined with the sense that this demon is sucking the existence from you, estimating that among 5–20% of humans have experienced sleep paralysis and nightmare collectively. The student Owen Davies cites a soldier who fought for 13 consecutive months in frontline Korea. This man stated of his unmarried nightmare attack in 1964, "Never, earlier than or since, have I experienced the fear of that night." To make this attack slightly less terrifying, the victim's mind imposes at the entity-acquainted cultural stereotype. So it smiles that SP nightmares have yielded 3 demons across time and space: the witch, the vampire, and the alien abductor. In the maximum scientific and prosperous countries within the international, SP victims have often been particularly bewildered, lonely or misunderstood. Although this situation has changed when you consider that I started researching the subject 10 years in the past. Scientific technology has now not banished the nightmare, and might indeed no longer but have understood it. The vampire scares humans to loss of life. In winter 1731–2, the village of Medvedia on the Morava River was convulsed by way of an epic vampire panic, targeted on the dying of Arnaud Payolet 5 years earlier than. Had you stumbled into Medvedia on the right second, you may have visible and smelled 11 decapitated corpses blazing into the wintry weather sky. During those activities, as a minimum, human beings died of fear. A younger woman named Stanaka lay right down to sleep 15 days ago, sparkling and healthful. But in the dark she started up out of her sleep with a terrible cry, nervous and trembling, and complained that she had been throttled by the son of a haiduk by using the call of Milo, who had died 9 weeks earlier. She then experienced a awesome ache within the chest and became worse hour via hour, until sooner or later she died at the 1/3 day. Stanaka almost honestly died of voodoo death, catalyzed through her SP nightmare. Across centuries and continents, the same signs and symptoms are recorded. A European witch, vampire or ghost, or a tribal witch health practitioner triggers a terrifying attack of mind over a lie. The sufferer shuts down, offers up all desire, and dies in a single to 3 days. Shelley Adler located something widely comparable inside the case of Hmong refugees in America, whose surprising mysterious deaths within the late 70s and 80s stimulated Wes Craven to create Nightmare on Elm Street. Adler additionally confirmed how such a dying ought to arise in the maximum modern-day scientific footing. In a Tennessee hospital in 1974, a man died some weeks after being diagnosed with most cancers of the esophagus, simplest for an post-mortem to expose that his esophagus become flawlessly wholesome. Like all the ones victims of the supernatural, he had died of darkish perception. Vampire poltergeists. Given how terrifying sleep paralysis nightmares may be to fashionable rationalists, we are able to apprehend the wild hysteria they provoked in vampire country. In such instances, vampire assaults had been as precise an explanation as any for an wholly bewildering phenomenon. By evaluation with, for example, current America, back there you advised all and sundry about the nocturnal assaults, and got plenty of help. Unfortunately, due to the fact anyone quickly knew of the vampire, a form of electric-powered terror snaked via the village, and soon more humans were having nightmares, and everybody hearing of those. And so, and in a few instances this wild terror seems to have worried a poltergeist. It took me a long time to get my head around these, but they certainly do exist. A traditional vampire poltergeist exploded through the island of Mykonos simply earlier than Christmas 1700. After a person died inside the fields. Something, his ghost, began by throwing fixtures around and grabbing human beings from behind. As the fear of the Greek Vrykolakas intensified, so did the violence. The vampire poltergeist broke doors, roofs and windows, beat human beings up, and shredded their garments. Whole families fled their houses to sleep inside the open square, or escape to the nation-state. Finally, having carved up to the dead man and handiest made subjects worse, the islanders took his corpse to a separate island and burned it on the 1st of January 1701. Happy New Year! There is very good proof that strain does get worse poltergeist attacks in Mykonos and somewhere else. Rituals of destruction might also have calmed the stress and consequently stopped the nightmares or the poltergeist assaults. If so, we're compelled to confess that such supposedly irrational behavior had a sure cost to it. And if you are truly being besieged by a poltergeist, it might be more rational to admit it than to permit your scientific side try to speak you out of it. When the undead have been actually not useless. The depth of vampire terror is nowhere extra grimly clean than in those cases wherein the supposedly dead had certainly been buried alive. This was a critical danger at some stage in records, as we visible inside the case of these disinterred corpses determined to have gnawed their personal palms. The trouble became worse in a great deal of vampire country, due to the perception which you ought to bury a corpse whilst it changed into still heat. And if a useless man or woman did all of sudden upward push up out of coma, matters got a good deal. A lot nastier. On one Greek island around 1900 a comatose man slowly commenced to rise up from his coffin earlier than the complete funeral assembly. Well, the people there believed he turned into becoming a Vrykolakas. In their fright they threw the whole thing they could find at him, sticks, rocks, something, and killed him, from useless to undead, to dead again in a very short space of time. But this became nothing to what should occur in Russia at the stop of the 19th century, if you woke for your coffin in Russian vampire country. The high-quality case situation while you hammered at the lid became for the hysterical grave diggers to pile on the earth double velocity and go away you there. But in a village known as Sorovsky in 1890 a man actually got out and fled into a woman's residence. Minutes later he had been seized with the aid of the horrified villagers, who had flung him down out of doors and hammered aspen stakes through his body. It changed into left there all day, till the ritual hour of sunset, while it turned into thrown right into a lavatory. Vampires are a great deal older than you suspect. We have appropriate motive to consider that revenants are as antique as fear itself. Take, as an instance, the vampire skeleton, observed in Mykolos within the Czech Republic, in summer 2008. In a 4,000-years-old grave in East Bohemia, archaeologists determined that the person's frame was weighed down with two large stones, one at the chest, and one on the pinnacle. Head and heart have been traditional places for the seat of the soul all through records, and the soul changed into the chief wrongdoer in maximum vampire panics. In different cases you genuinely did everything you could to forestall the revenant getting out. In summertime 2012, for instance, Bulgarian archaeologists digging inside the Black Sea metropolis of Sozopol determined medieval skeletons pierced through the chest with iron rods. 7. Another approach turned into to sincerely flipper. Suspect corpse over. Then, if it tried to get out, it would dig itself in addition into the earth, no longer to the surface. Incredibly, this became acknowledged to show up in World War I. In July 1915 in France, an officer noticed British soldiers burying a German corpse face down. And in classic vampire U.S. preventative burial strategies may additionally well persist to this day. In a Romanian village called Maratinu de Sus, one Petra Toma died just before Christmas. Presently Toma's niece suffered nightmares and appeared critically ill. She claimed that her uncle became journeying her at nighttime and feeding from her coronary heart, that he become a strigoi. Notice again the probably trigger of SP nightmare. Toma's corpse turned into dug up and inspected and proven as a strigoi. His coronary heart became gouged out, spiked on a pitchfork and roasted. And charred fragments of it given to the sick female to drink in water. She made a terrific recuperation. All this took place in Icinus 2003-4. Just before Stephanie Meyer signed her settlement for Twilight. And sure, Maratinu de Sus is in Transylvania. Surprising vampire solutions. The wish that an upside-down vampire could not wriggle itself over tips at any other forgotten reality. The real vampires had been no longer evil aristocratic masterminds with chilling plans for world dominance. Frankly, they were quite dim. Mercia McDermott explains that in Bulgaria, one ought to take away a vampire by way of drawing near him with a heat loaf and welcoming him to go to a few remote area at the pretext of a fair or a wedding. After which forsaking him there. Alternatively, one ought to ship him to get fish from the Danube, wherein he would fall in and be drowned. She and Paul Barber added numerous seeds, together with millet, mustard and poppy, might be strewn along the path to the grave, as well as left inside the grave itself. Perhaps suffering an early shape of OCD. The vampire need to depend these types of, and so is too busy to get in your mattress and scare you to demise. Count Dracula certainly. Anyone disillusioned through those less than lurid techniques may want to bear in thoughts that absolutely puncturing a bloated corpse with a stake is a difficult and messy enterprise. At the same time as burning up to 11 of them may additionally exhaust a village's gas resources in a difficult winter. Still, if you are determined to burn a revenant, here's a low-tech Bulgarian answer. Your Bulgarian professional sorcerer would bottle the vampire. They used a holy icon and a bottle full of the vampire's favorite meals, excrement, manifestly. They then pursued their quarry relentlessly, instead like a few vampire-looking sheepdog, until it had nowhere left to turn and became compelled into the bottle. Cork your bottle, throw it on the hearth, and good night vampire. Assuming that this did in reality show up, we must bet that the vampire became invisible, and that the sorcerer's fundamental talent turned into a gift for high drama. Just a shame that vampire cinema had not reached deepest Bulgaria at this point. You ought to inherit vampirism. We owe many vampire treasures to two British military officials, St. Clair and Brophy, who stayed for some time within the Bulgarian village of Derekuoi in the 1860s. They inform of ways. 1 year. Their young nearby servant Theodore, as the son of a mentioned vampire, was doing penance at some point of this gift lent by neither smoking, nor consuming wine or spirits. As a way to expiate the sins of his father, a good way to save you himself inheriting the propensity. Interestingly, Theodore's father was a vampire poltergeist. And so may nicely were authentic stressed ghost, falling in love with a Miss Tutoritsa. Theodore determined himself so suspect that he turned into forbidden through her dad and mom to marry her. Some years later, Brophy and St. Clair gained an update in this saga. Brace yourselves here. Not very wisely, Theodore had switched his attentions to the lady's sister, Marinka, and eloped along with her. They additionally produced a baby. As a end result, Marinka's residence became burned, she became thrown in prison, and her vampire baby put to loss of life. If everyone can consider a terrific title for a film wherein Romeo and Juliet stray into the plot of Twilight, many thank you. The Vampires of New England. You may also have visible lately that President Trump wishes to sell the coaching of greater patriotic history in U.S. colleges. Here are just a few of the things that might unearth about New England through the 19th century. Thanks to Michael Lee Bell, author of Food for the Dead, we realize that a special form of vampirism existed here, at a time when intake ravaged the Northeast, claiming the lives of possibly 13 individuals in only one own family. The vampire became identified as scapegoat. One individual died of consumption, and others quickly fell ill, and so the primary dead character was exhumed and inspected. Any sign of lifestyles at all, which may just remnants of heart or lungs, indicated that this vampire was feeding on residing family from the grave. Accordingly, heart or lungs might be burned, and the ashes given to the sick to drink in water. A specifically famous New England vampire was young Mercy Brown, who died in 1892. But for me, the maximum memorable piece of American vampire destruction took place in Vermont around 1830. On the village green in Woodstock, a massive crowd gathered to watch a heart being burned in an iron pot. It turned into currently buried in a large hollow, 10 feet rectangular and 15 feet deep, and pinned under a huge granite slab. Bullock's blood became then sprinkled on the earth. We can well imagine racist Americans retelling this pagan ceremony with glee if it had passed off in fabled voodoo U.S. In truth, the heart belonged to one of the Corwin circle of relatives, at a time while Thomas Corwin became a U.S. Senator, and accrued there with several medical doctors on the burning have been the Honorable Norman Williams, General Lyman Mower, and General Eustace Durdick. Perhaps the movie, Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter has a few grains of fact in it in any case.